Well, hello there and welcome to this revision video, which is on the topic of AQA GCSE History, Conflict and Tension, 1918 to 1939. In this video, we're going to look at the Treaty of Versailles, one of the most famous treaties in history. It was signed on the 28th of June, 1919. The French General Marshal Ferdinand Foch, when he heard about this treaty, said that this is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. So we're going to look at the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, we're going to look at the territorial changes, the military restrictions involved in the peace treaty, the idea of Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, and also about the reparations as well. So without further ado, let's find out about the Treaty of Versailles. So at the end of the First World War, the armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918, and arrangements were made to resolve the conflict through the form of a peace treaty. Now, Germany had suffered massively during the First World War in terms of its people. The blockade of its ports, the British blockade, has caused huge shortages in Germany. It led to disease and starvation and shortages of things like food and fuel, for example. But the Germany that was negotiating the treaty was a different Germany to the Germany of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now, you can see there a picture of Ulrich von Brockdorff-Rantzau, who was a diplomat who led the German delegation at the Treaty of Versailles. And his delegation would have expected the treaty to be fairly lenient and quite fair towards Germany. And there's three main reasons for this. And when you're thinking about the key question of why Germany disliked the Treaty of Versailles, I think it's important for you to understand that Germany expected the peace treaty to be fairly lenient. So firstly, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who's largely seen and blamed and seen as being responsible for Germany's involvement in the First World War, he had abdicated and a new Republican government had taken control of Germany. And one of the conditions of the armistice was that this government would be democratic. The second key fact is that Germany did not directly start the First World War, and they could quite feasibly argue that they joined the war to support Austria-Hungary when Russia had declared war on Austria-Hungary. And obviously the whole background to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on the 28th of June 1914. His assassination was basically putting Austria-Hungary and Serbia within conflict with one another. So the actual origins of the conflict were quite complex, and therefore to simply blame Germany for starting the First World War would probably really be, if you look at the facts behind it, quite harsh. The third thing is that President Woodrow Wilson of the United States of America made a speech in January 1918 to the American Congress where he outlined his 14 points, and these were his ideas for how Europe should be reconstructed after the First World War. And it promised ideas like self-determination, where the people in different areas would be able to decide who governed them. It was quite idealistic. It was based around ideas of things like free trade, freedom of the seas, for example, League of Nations. And the vast majority of German-speaking people in 1919 wanted to be ruled by Germany. And President Woodrow Wilson himself had gone on record saying that he didn't want Germany to be punished too harshly. He wanted Europe to be able to rebuild quickly. And of course, America wanted to be able to trade with a strong Europe. So Germany expected a fairly lenient treaty. And I think it's really important that you reflect on that when you think about the nature of the Treaty of Versailles. So when we're thinking about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, it's useful to think about the idea of land, army, money and blame. And that gives you the basics of the Treaty of Versailles. So it's good to remember some of the key information about the land they lost. So they lost around about 13% of their land. But most famously of all, Germany lost Alsace-Lorraine to France. Now, Alsace-Lorraine had been a territory which Germany had taken from France in the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870-1871. So the fact that Germany lost this land was not only a blow in terms of it being a significant area of land, but also it was quite humiliating and a blow to German pride. The Rhineland area, which you can see there in the sort of dark red on the map, was the area to the west of the River Rhine on the border towards France and Belgium. This was to be demilitarized, and it's important to note that this area had been demilitarized as part of the armistice as well. So this was something that was just continuing the state of play in Germany for what had been happening in Germany since the 11th of November 1918. Now the army is reduced to 100,000 soldiers. No navy, no air force. 100,000 soldiers is actually gave Germany enough soldiers to defend itself, and actually Britain and America were very much behind this in the peace treaty because they wanted Germany to be able to defend itself, particularly from any threats from the east, from Russia, who had undergone a communist revolution. There was a lot of concern in Britain and America that if the treaty had been too harsh on Germany, that basically the Russians may well have then tried to spread the idea of the ideology of communism into Germany and take control, and Germany would fall into the sphere of Russian influence at that time. So that's one of the reasons why they're allowed 100,000 soldiers. No navy and no air force, only 6 battleships and no submarines. Now, in terms of money, the big three, Clemenceau, Lloyd George and Wilson, agreed that Germany should have to pay reparations for the damage done. France wanted the reparations bill to be pretty high, 44 billion, the British 24 billion, and the US 4.4 billion. And a commission was set up to decide the final bill in 1921, which is actually around about 6.6 billion. So the actual fee of the reparations was a lot less than what the French or indeed the British would have liked. Article 231 said that Germany had to accept the blame for starting the First World War. Now, that is one of the most controversial aspects of the treaty and one of the things that Germany disliked the most in the Treaty of Versailles. So let's have a look at the finer points of the treaty in a bit more depth and detail. If you look there on the map, there's a few other things for you to think about. So, for example, Germany was not allowed to unite with Austria, the Anschluss. Germany lost of all of its overseas colonies, so lots of different things for you to think about. And we're just going to look at some of the finer points of the treaty in a bit more depth and detail on the next slide. So some nice statistics for you to remember. Germany lost around 13% of its land. It lost all of its overseas colonies. So it had a fair few colonies, for example, in Africa. It lost Togoland and Cameroon. It lost the important port of Danzig, which is now known as Gdansk, which you can see there on the map, just to the sort of west of East Prussia. They lost the Saar and Upper Silesia, which were very important industrial areas. Lots of coal, for example, in the Saarland, the Saar coal fields. So they lost about 26% of their coal resources. Article 231, War Guilt Clause. The reparations in the end were fixed at 6.6 billion, as we've talked about. The French got to receive about 50% of the reparations, and the rest of the reparations went to Belgium and Britain and some of the other countries that fought in the First World War, but mainly to the French. 6 million German-speaking people were now living outside Germany, and that would cause issues to international relations in the future. So, for example, many German-speaking people living in Czechoslovakia in the so-called Sudetenland area. Germany lost 48% of their steel. Poland was given access to the sea, cutting off East Prussia from the rest of Germany, the so-called Polish corridor. North Schleswig went to Denmark, talked about Saar coalfields, and Memel went to Lithuania. And it's worth noting that if Wilson's idea of self-determination had actually been applied, then it may well have seen Austria being quite happy to be as part of a new sort of Germany, but of course that couldn't happen because that would have meant that Germany would have gone through the First World War and actually gained land had they actually been allowed to unite with Austria. So the Anschluss, the unification with Austria, was banned under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and also actually interestingly banned within the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which also dealt with Austria at the end of the First World War. So one of the key features of the Treaty of Versailles is just how angry people were in Germany when the treaty was signed. And you can see here a few cartoons from the time, which just give you that sense of how angry people were about the Treaty of Versailles. People used the phrase that it was a diktat, a dictated peace, that Germany had no say in this peace treaty and wasn't allowed to negotiate, and basically was presented to the Germans to sign on 28th of June 1919, and had they not signed it, it would have led to the war starting again. So very much those pictures talk about how the big three are ignoring Germany, and Clemenceau in the middle cartoon portrayed as a vampire type character, sucking the lifeblood out of Germany. Germany being portrayed as an innocent victim, helpless and defenseless. And again, that whole idea about Germany being forced to take their medicine in that cartoon in a British newspaper in 1919. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks for listening. So that was a revision video about GCSE history, conflict and tension, focusing, of course, on the Treaty of Versailles. Thanks very much.